afternoon. I'm Toral Shah. I'm a nutritional scientist, integrative medicine practitioner, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the anti-inflammatory diet and lifestyle and how this can make a huge impact to your health and help you to beat disease. So, just in case you're wondering, I specialize in breast cancer and other cancers, and I'm very passionate about that. But I'm also passionate about reducing the risk of all disease. And while breast cancer is my kind of main thing that I talk about, what we understand is inflammation is actually the common thing in so many long-term chronic diseases, and I'm going to share more about that today. So, what actually is inflammation? I think that's something that not all of us, we've all heard the term inflammation, but what actually is inflammation? Inflammation is our body's fire alarm. It's incredibly important because our immune system, which acts like a fantastic CCTV camera system, is always on the alert for something attacking us, for us to be hurt, for any wounds. And so the immune system switches on when any of these things happen, and it uses inflammation as one of the amazing tools to help us to heal. So, for example, if you cut yourself, then you'll see redness, there'll be swelling, and then you'll slowly over time start to see the cut heal. Now, that is what we call acute inflammation. However, that is supposed to sort of come along when you hurt yourself, when something attacks you like a bacteria or virus, but it's also supposed to go away. Now, in our modern busy lifestyle, we often have this kind of chronic low grade inflammation, and it's something that we can't necessarily feel. It's often invisible, but it does actually impact our risk of disease and aging. So, if you look in these images, you can see that on the left hand side, the short term protective, is only a little bit of inflammation in that particular area which needs healing. When we have long term low grade inflammation, this can be damaging because it can actually spread around our whole bodies and not just be where we've got a wound or where we've got an infection. So that's why that becomes really important to understand what inflammation actually is. And it is beneficial to us to a certain point. And I think that's the thing with our whole body and whole immune system. We have these amazing systems which are balanced. They work in a response to signals, but those signals then need to be switched off so that that particular thing, whether it's inflammation or any other part of the immune system, is switched off. And unfortunately, we now have a world which means that a lot of the time some of these signals are not being switched off. So we do get this systemic long-term inflammation. So, as I shared, it's very common. So, if you think about it as your garden, inflammation is kind of the common soil which occurs where lots of diseases can grow. If you think about diseases as plants, so anything from type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, you'll see here we've got things like multiple sclerosis, we've even got things like high blood pressure, dementia, depression, Alzheimer's. And we have something called CRP, which is something that we can actually measure, and I'll talk to you a bit more about that. But these inflammatory biomarkers, which we can actually measure from just simple blood tests, can increase with poor lifestyle patterns. So if we're highly stressed, we have a poor diet, we have a lack of movement, i.e. we're sedentary, or we have disrupted sleep. And I'm going to talk about all of these. So what happens when inflammation actually persists? So we have these small signaling molecules called cytokines. Cytokines will come up in this talk over and over again. And these signaling molecules are incredibly important because they are messengers between cells. They're crucial for regulating our immune system, inflammation, cell growth, telling us our immune cells when to switch off and when to switch on, and fighting any kind of infection and when to calm down. Now, when our immune system isn't responding to those signals, that's when we have inflammation. And we can have two types of cytokines. One is inflammatory cytokines, and we can have anti-inflammatory cytokines. So our immune system releases these cytokines and free radicals. Free radicals are damaging molecules, and I'll share a little bit more about that in the next slide. But these can damage our tissues, our vessels, our DNA, and that basically means our body will start inflammaging, which means that it's responding by storing fat, particularly around the waist. It's producing more of these pro-inflammatory cytokines, which increases more inflammation. And then this becomes a bit of a vicious cycle and impacts both our immune system, increases inflammation, and impacts our risk of disease. So, what triggers inflammation? There's lots of common things. Many of these things are things that you will all know about. So, processed food and sugar. When we say processed, I mean ultra processed food. Sleep deprivation, which is something that many people haven't considered, that it really impacts our health and well-being, other than just feeling tired or other than making our brain work a little bit more slowly. It can actually increase inflammation. Chronic stress, sedentary habits, being sitting down for most of the day, smoking, pollution, alcohol, and poor gut health. So which one, I just want you to take a little 10 seconds to work out which one do you think impacts you the most. For me personally, I'm a horrible sleeper. I do everything possible to support my sleep, and I'm going to share some of my tips a little bit later on in this talk. But which one do you think impacts you the most? For me, sleep is a problem, and I know that when I don't have enough sleep, I know that there's inflammation happening in my body, partly because obviously I can measure it from CRP, but also I just know my body. So I want you to think about which particular trigger impacts you. We were going to do a poll, but we're just doing it like this because otherwise there's a bit of a delay. So now, the one that you've picked, keep that in mind. We're going to be talking about that. So, as I shared, we can measure inflammation. This CRP. CRP is C-reactive protein. It's a simple blood test. We use it as medics for lots of different ways, but particularly to measure infections, inflammatory disease, monitor autoimmune conditions. And it's a really good, cheap test for us to see whether there's inflammation in the body. Now, what we know is that with CRP can change quite quickly. So if you start taking on some of those bad habits that we talked about earlier, then your CRP will increase. But however, we also know that we can reduce it quite quickly by improving our diet, having more physical activity and not being quite so sedentary, supporting our sleep, allowing ourselves time to rest and recover, stress management, and supporting our mindset so that, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later in the talk, and having some connection and purpose. So we'll start with the food part, because obviously that's the part where a lot of us probably don't really realize how food impacts inflammation, and something we can do something about easily. So there are all these foods that can actually increase inflammation, and I'm sure none of you will be shocked by those foods I'm sharing. So there's refined carbs and sugary drinks, so things like sodas like Coke and Pepsi, having ultra processed meats and fried foods, so that fast food, fried chicken, and things like that. Trans fats, which, to be fair, our government's done a much better job in the UK of trying to decrease those trans fats but they are still present in ultra processed food, alcohol, and then frequent takeaways and ultra processed snacks. But luckily, we also know there's lots and lots of different types of food that reduces inflammation. And I will go into this into a little bit more detail. So the first thing is eating colorful fruits and vegetables. We want to be eating at least 5 portions of different colors and fruits and vegetables each day. And I always say eat the rainbow. The next thing is oily fish, flaxseeds, chia. So we want to be having an omega-3 rich diet. And I will share a lot more detail on each of these. Having more olive oil, nuts, and seeds, so these are healthy fats. Having more legumes and whole grains, so we can add more fiber to a diet. And then we want to be adding herbs and spices, such as turmeric, ginger, garlic, just things like mint, coriander, all of those things, which not only make our food so tasty, but also have powerful antioxidant benefits. So, as I shared, eat the rainbows. One of the things, if you ever work with me, ever hear me speak, I will say this multiple times a day, and I could have this tattooed on my head and I'd still be repeating it over and over again. So, we want to be eating lots of different colors of fruits and vegetables daily. Most of us actually eat the same 8 to 10 vegetables all year round. Although this doesn't really make sense when you think about seasonal eating. Different fruits and vegetables should be available at different times of the year. So right now we're in the depth of winter in the UK, and so the things that are available as seasonal are things like all these cruciferous vegetables like the broccolis, the cauliflowers, our root vegetables, carrots, potatoes, sweet potatoes, all of those sorts of things, and things like cabbages and things. Everything else, obviously, we import it. But really, we shouldn't be eating things that are not seasonal. We should be eating them in season. So berries should be in kind of the summer when they're in season. In autumn, we should be having all those beautiful pumpkins and things like that. When it comes to the summer, and oranges, we're looking at things like peaches, nectarines, all of those things we should be having in season because they're much higher nutrients at that time of day. That time of year, rather. So what are antioxidants? It's a common question because people probably hear this all the time. So think of antioxidants as being your body's kind of protective shield. When harmful molecules called free radicals try to damage your cells, if you think about it like rust attacking metal, I think that's a really great analogy. Antioxidants are really helpful because they step into our bodies and stop them. These free radicals are basically missing a piece. It's called an electron, and they're really going around everywhere desperately looking for one. And until they find one, they can actually damage your DNA and your cell walls. So antioxidants, which we get from food, they're very generous and they donate their own electrons and they neutralize these troublemakers before they cause harm, which leads to some of these chronic diseases that we've discussed. And these protective compounds are found in colorful foods like berries, and one of the ones that's found in berries, the vitamin C, nuts, vitamin E, carrots, beta carotene, tomatoes, lycopene, and many whole grains. And this is our nature's way of keeping us healthy from the inside out. So this is why it's very important that you try and eat all those different colors because it reduces oxidative stress. Oxidative stress, you'll hear me talk about, is something that happens to your body when we talk about damaging our cells and our DNA. And it also helps to reduce inflammation. So the thing we talked about earlier is choosing healthy fats. Now, there's definitely different types of fats, and there's been a lot of discussion recently as the Americans have released their new dietary guidelines. And with this, we want to be looking at omega-3 fats. Omega-3 fats are really powerful anti-inflammatory foods. They are essential fats that our body can't produce on our own, and so we do need to eat them. However, our ratio has changed. In kind of days before pre-industrialization, particularly when we're hunter-gatherers, our ratio of omega-3 fats to omega-6 fats was actually about 1-to-1. Currently, we're eating about 20 times more omega-6 fats than omega-3 fats. It's not that they're bad per se, but having too many of them can create inflammation. So we want to be eating more of these healthy fats. So what are the healthy fats and what can we do about them? So healthy fats include things like salmon, nuts and seeds, avocado, olive oil, olives, eggs. We have 3 different types of omega-3s: EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, DHA, doxorubanoic acid, and ALA, alpha linoleic acid. And you'll see that EPA and DHA we can really only get from seafood, and marine is from the marine, whereas ALA we can get from plant-based. However, as much as vegans, vegetarians who don't eat seafood think they can get as much as they need when it comes to omega-3 from flax seeds, chia seeds, none of us process it and convert them very well to EPA to DHA. Some people might be a bit better. That might be an 18% conversion rate, but some people will be quite low, only 8%. So those kind of people would probably want to supplement with an omega-3 fat. So that would be eating something like a fish oil capsule, or you can get plant-based alternatives which come from algae. So that's where you'd probably want to supplement if you don't eat those foods. And actually these days, even our kind of salmon and things like that has got less omega-3s in it because it's farmed. So we may want to supplement in any case. And then other foods that reduce inflammation are those amazing, rich, plant-rich foods, whole foods, which have got lots and lots and lots of fiber. So if you think about our gut microbiome, which we will talk a little bit more, fiber becomes very, very important. So all of these foods, legumes, whole grains, flax seeds, chia, quinoa, all of them have got a lot of fiber, and they can help stabilize our blood sugar. Now, if you eat food that's rich in protein and rich in fiber, it basically helps to stabilize blood sugar because it releases blood sugar very, very slowly into your bloodstream. So high blood sugar, we know, which you might know as hyperglycemia, can also promote inflammation. Whereas if you have stable blood sugar, it helps to maintain your body functions and supports anti-inflammatory effects of insulin. The inflammatory state then basically stops our body from being able to respond to insulin, which leads to higher blood sugar levels. And that, again, leads to a vicious cycle of kind of high blood sugar, which leads to inflammation. So we really want to try and avoid this. So we want to be eating these foods, which are rich in fiber, lots of antioxidants, support our gut health, and all of this will help to reduce inflammation. So the gut microbiome, many of you may have heard of this because it's been a complete, in the last 10 years, we've suddenly got very obsessed with our gut health. And for rightly so, because it's a really important part of our immune system. And I think that's something that many people don't know, that how important our gut health is to our immune system and how it needs it to work well. So a healthy gut can reduce inflammation in lots of different ways. So our gut microbiome has got thousands of different bacteria and viruses and other microorganisms. Now, many of these bacteria are beneficial to us and they're symbiotic, meaning we give them a home in our gut and we give them food from the food that we're eating. And in return, they do some amazing jobs for us. They support with our immune system, they make lots of beneficial molecules, including anti inflammatory compounds. They create things like vitamin K, which we can't actually do ourselves. So it's really important that we look after those beneficial bacteria and try to reduce the number of not so beneficial bacteria. The beneficial bacteria also convert fiber into these fatty acids, which help to strengthen the gut barrier. They reduce inflammation. It means that if we do get infected by any toxins, or we create toxins, or we eat them, they're actually contained in our gut, and then we can actually kind of remove them from our bodies. And it also helps to train our immune system. So as I shared, you can think about your immune system being kind of 70% kind of in the gut, and the friendly kind of beneficial bacteria keep the inflammatory or the bad bacteria under control. So when there's a bit of a lack of balance, say you get food poisoning or some sort of other kind of infection, then obviously things become very imbalanced. So what we want to do is balance it up, because otherwise inflammation markers rise throughout the body. The gut also communicates with our brain through so many different ways, and through our immune signals, through nerve pathways. There's also something called a vagus nerve, and that impacts brain inflammation, our mood, and thinking. This also means that when your gut's not working well, it can lead to increase in depression, anxiety, brain health disorders, leading to long-term things like Alzheimer's, dementia, and depression. So we do want to really look after our gut, because it's really going to protect our brain. And we also know that stress really affects our gut. So think about those days when let's say you've got an exam or you've got a test or something's going on, and your gut becomes a little bit looser, or a little bit, you just have this funny feeling in your tummy. That is basically the stress affecting our gut and our bacteria. And again, that can increase the cycle of inflammation. So, what can we do to support our gut health? There's so many different things we can do, but I think what we need to do is to really feed those beneficial bacteria. So, we want to eat a much wider range of fruits and vegetables. So, instead of just buying the same fruits and vegetables, I'm going to challenge you all to try one or two new vegetables each week. And that also means that you get a variety of antioxidants and anti inflammatory compounds, but you also support your beneficial bacteria by having different foods. So just like we all have our favorite food, the thousands of bacteria in our gut all have their favorite food, which is generally in the form of plants and fiber. So by having a bigger variety of plant-based foods, it means we can more likely to feed our beneficial bacteria its favorite food, and that's going to make a huge difference to immune system and your overall health and well-being. So, as I said, and a way of doing that is by like maybe ordering a veg box where you don't know what's going to come, or just seeing something new in the supermarket on the greengrocer and just buying it. And then, we're so lucky we've got internet now, so we can share lots and lots of different recipes. We want to be having whole grains rather than refined grains. So that means things like we want to be having things like brown rice, or colored rice rather than white rice. We want to be using whole grain flours rather than white flour, etc., etc. And really looking for those greens and really thinking about different things. So I like to add in a mix of barley and spelt and quinoa, all sorts, and like whole grain oats to my diet every day. Then we want to be having more legumes, beans, nuts, and seeds. These are really powerful for our immune system, our gut health, lots and lots of fiber. And then fermented foods such as kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, tempeh, live yogurt. They actually contain powerful beneficial bacteria, and we often call them probiotics. Really important to train your immune system. And whilst probiotic supplements may be useful, what they do is probiotic supplements are a bit of a placeholder. They basically create a better environment in your gut for some of these beneficial bacteria to grow on their own. So you don't necessarily want to be taking probiotics for a very long time, but what you do want to be having is lots of fermented foods which are rich in these probiotic bacteria, and they are more likely to get to your gut. We also want to reduce antibiotics until we need them. Antibiotics are everywhere within our world. They're often used in animals, kind of in soil, things like that. So we want to try and limit them. And if you do get a course of antibiotics, we want to complete that so you don't have as many antibiotic resistant bacteria. You want to reduce artificial sweeteners. We're actually learning quite a lot about this now, but we still need to learn more. But artificial sweeteners such as aspartame can actually impact our gut, and it's really something that we're trying to understand a little bit more about how it impacts our overall health and well-being. And then again, if you do end up taking antibiotics, you want to consider having probiotics or having kind of these fermented foods. We know that physical activity and stress management can also help to improve gut health. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So spices and herbs. Spices and herbs are wonderful because they add so much flavor to our food without adding any kind of calories. And I'm not saying that we should be looking at calories necessarily when it comes to good gut health and what we're eating, but it's something to think about. And these is just a very, very small list of some of the things that you could be adding to your food. But we're looking at really powerful anti-inflammatories. Turmeric, ginger, and garlic are so powerful as full of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory foods. So you want to be adding this to all the foods. And then beautiful herbs and spices such as rosemary, cinnamon, oregano, coriander, mint, chives, even black pepper. All of these things, not only do they make our food taste way, way, way better, but they're also naturally anti-inflammatory, and they reduce oxidative stress, and they support our immune health. And I think it's almost like the spice cupboard is almost like your kitchen pharmacy. By adding all these things, not only do you make your food taste so much better, but you also are using them as powerful anti-inflammatories. So one other thing that we don't really think about is hydration. Hydration really is important for inflammation. And on that note, I'm going to have a sip of water. So drinking water helps our body to flush out substances that cause inflammation. It supports our immune system because it means our immune system can work well. It helps blood flow because we need water to deliver nutrients and remove waste from tissues. We need water for our joints, and we also need our water for our muscles to heal. The problem is that many of us probably don't drink enough water, particularly in the winter when we don't feel thirsty because it's not hot. So we want to really think about how we can stay hydrated. We want to be drinking at least 2 liters of water a day. This doesn't mean actual just water. That can include herbal teas, water with a little bit of cordial or lemon juice, or with a slice of cucumber or mint sprigs to make it taste a little bit better. Because I know a lot of us don't like the taste of water. The herbal teas are really important, I think, in winter when it's cold, because it's much easier to drink something hot or warm rather than just tap water or cold water. We have to remember that caffeine and alcohol impacts our water intake. A lot of these things are diuretics, meaning that they actually make you go to the toilet, so you kind of end up weighing out. So there are lots of little tricks that we can use to make us drink more water. One is having a water bottle, which you can keep refilled and remind yourself to refill, so that you have to drink 2 or 3 of those a day. We want to make sure we're having a little bit of water when we exercise. We want to think about kind of having a daily goal for water and just really being conscious of our thirst. A lot of the time we actually confuse a thirst for hunger. So I'm not saying that we should listen to our hunger cues. Absolutely we should, but it's really important that sometimes, particularly in the winter when we have got the heating on and it's cold, we may be thirsty first. So it's worth trying to drink a little bit of water first and then eating. So vitamin D, it's not just a vitamin, it's a really powerful steroid hormone, and it's a very powerful immune system hormone and vitamin. It's not just important for our bones and other functions. It also regulates our hormones, it regulates and promotes our immune system, and it works as a really powerful anti-inflammatory. When people have vitamin D deficiency, we're definitely more at risk of infection, but also a risk of many diseases. When we look at cancer, we look at anyone who's been diagnosed with cancer, often is 80 to 90%, they're likely to be deficient in vitamin D. Now, in the UK, we do not make vitamin D from the sun between October and end of March because the angle of the sun is wrong, is not correct for it to kind of initiate the making of vitamin D in your skin. So we need to supplement, and something that the government became very important about, kind of very keen on promoting in COVID when so many of us were trapped inside for so long. And actually, if you look at the NHS website, it does actually recommend that everyone supplements with vitamin D between October to March. And for anyone who's at risk to be supplementing all year, particularly if you're ethnic minority, have more melanin in your skin, you do, or you don't, you cover up, or you're not outside doing those vitamin D kind of hours, making hours, then you should definitely supplement all year round. So, what do you actually eat then? Because you've heard all this information, and what proportions to eat it in, and what is actually a healthy diet. So, actually, a healthy plate is the same as an anti-inflammatory plate. You want a half your plate to be colorful and diverse vegetables. You want to be thinking about having 3 different vegetables each plate. You want to be thinking about having a variety of colors. You want there to be a quarter of your plate to be protein, so that things like chicken or shrimp or salmon or beans or cheese or any of those things, eggs. We want to think about a quarter of your plate being whole grain carbohydrates, including beans and legumes. So it could be, sourdough toast. It could be some whole grain rice. It could be some whole grain pasta. It could be sweet potato, any of those things. And then we really want to make sure that we're having those healthy fats that we talked about earlier. So those healthy fats include olive oil, nuts, seeds, avocado, and they're very, very important. They're very full of these polyphenol antioxidants, and they give us our important omega-3 polyunsaturated fats, which are very, very important for just not our immune system, but also our brain. Vitamin D, again, you may want to supplement and need it, and you may want to supplement with omega-3 fatty acids, particularly if you're vegetarian or vegan, or even if you don't eat that much fish. It's very hard to get what you need from the diet these days. So then we come on to physical activity and movement. Everyone knows that exercise, physical activity is very, very good for you, but do you know that it reduces inflammation? Our muscles working actually release these powerful anti-inflammatory compounds. If we have regular exercise, it prevents harmful immune cells from entering our fat tissue. We know that exercise impacts our immune system in so many different ways, but in ways that it's not just about losing fat. They actually release a lot of these our working muscles compounds that can actually clean up the debris in our brain. It can do things like take up glucose, so reducing glucose sensitivity, resistance rather, and it also helps to maintain healthy hormones. We talked about cytokines at the beginning, and we talked about there being anti-inflammatory ones and pro-inflammatory ones. So when you exercise, it reduces these pro-inflammatory cytokines and actually increases the anti-inflammatory ones. So exercise becomes really important. But what kind of exercise do we need to do, and how much should we be doing? So the Department of Health and Human Services, our UK NHS, really shares this very clearly. So we need to be having at least 150 minutes a week of moderate aerobic activity, or if you're going to be doing lots of very vigorous, so that means like playing squash or running or playing tennis or netball, any of those kind of sports, then you may only need 75 minutes of that. Or you want a mix of that. So let's say you're doing an hour of maybe squash, and then you want to balance that out with some low intensity work. So you'd be thinking about an in-between number, so maybe 100 minutes. But we also need to have strength training exercises for all our major muscle groups at least 2 times a week, and that's where so many of us actually don't include that. Now, muscles are a very important metabolic buffer in so many ways. It helps to reduce glucose resistance, insulin resistance. It really helps to maintain our metabolism, because we need muscle to take up glucose and to use it, and it helps us to stay strong. So we naturally lose after the age of 40 up to 10% of our 8 to 10% of our muscle mass each decade. So if you're not doing resistance training, you can lose so much of your muscle mass that's going to make you more prone to being quite frail, falling over, breaking your hip. So that's why it's very, very important. Walking is not just enough. We need to do a lot more than walking. Obviously, hiking up a hill, that is going to be useful. And leisure activities such as golf and dancing and exercise and snacking, all of these are so super important, but we do need to do resistance training for our muscles, because that impacts so many of our health issues, including reducing inflammation, reducing insulin resistance, and maintaining a muscle metabolism. So sleep is the one I talked about that really impacts me the most, as I'm a very, very poor sleeper. And our sleep and circadian rhythms actually really impact our immune system and inflammation in our body. So when we're sleep deprived, we have much the inflammatory markers in your blood are increased. So such as things like CRP, which we talked about at the very beginning. It also activates inflammatory pathways and changes our immune system, making our body a lot more susceptible to stress. So if you think about a night where you haven't slept very much, and then the next day you're often more hungry because it affects our hunger hormones, our leptin and ghrelin, but also we're also more likely to feel stressed. And a small thing happening can actually kind of make us feel very, very stressed. Our body's internal clock, that's what circadian rhythms are, that affects our inflammation levels. And certain inflammatory compounds make you feel sleepy. So when you're sick, you often feel very sleepy because we've got these inflammation molecules going around our body because they're helping you to rest and recover. Obviously, and then we want our body to heal, and so that's when the immune system kicks in. But when we have irregular sleep schedules, which some of you might have if you're working in the train industry, you might be doing shift work, that's going to disrupt your body's natural rhythms, and it's going to further increase inflammation. And if you regularly sleep less than 6 hours, this definitely leads to chronic inflammation, increases our risk of all those kind of lifestyle diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. For me personally, sleep is something I find very challenging. I'm a bedtime procrastinator. I also need to think about having a real routine, and I'm going to share some of my tips to help you to sleep better shortly. So when it comes to our immune system, our sleep and circadian rhythms really regulate and support our immune system to work at its best. So when we don't sleep, it dysregulates our immune system, it decreases those anti-inflammatory cytokines and increases those pro-inflammatory cytokines, and it basically makes our immune system work not quite so well, which is why when you've had a really busy period, maybe let's say Christmas or a really stressful period at work, and you haven't had enough sleep, you're much more likely to get sick because your immune system's not working quite so well. So it's very, very important for us to support our immune system in this way. So one of the things you can do, there's a few tips I can give you, and we call this sleep hygiene, and to help you to sleep. So first of all, we want to be away from our screens, and we want to switch off all our electronic devices, phone, TV, laptops, tablets, at least 60 minutes, ideally 90 minutes before sleeping. I know many of us don't do that. We're watching TV till we go to bed, we're scrolling on our phones, and it's something that I really challenge us all to do. I have to do the same for myself. I have to put my phone away, and actually using your phone and setting up automatic controls is one way of having it switch off, and so you don't use it before bed. We want our bedroom to actually be quite cool. We want it to be about 18 or 19 degrees because this helps our circadian rhythms and helps us sleep. So winter, this might look like making sure that you have a heating switching off before you go to bed so it's not too hot. In the summer, it might be looking like having fans or having the window open just to keep that kind of constant temperature. Some people find having a bath or shower before bed to be relaxing. Like babies, if we have a routine that we use every single day, it makes our body know that it's time for us to go to bed. So for me, I have a very, very strict routine in the way that I do the same thing in the same order. So I'll have a shower, I'll brush my teeth, I'll do my skincare routine, I'll then write my gratitude journal, I'll then do a meditation and then go to bed. So these are things that can help. Gratitude journal, sometimes it's very useful to write down 5 things that you're grateful for, especially if you've had a difficult day, and you may have to really think about it, but that helps to put you in a positive mindset, and that can help you to sleep. The other thing you might want to do is have a notebook to write down anything you're worrying about and write it down so it's not just in your head. That can be super useful. Meditation apps can help us to calm our mind and to help us to sleep. I quite like Insight Timer, which is free of charge. Magnesium. When we're stressed, when we can't sleep, when we are having a lot of exercise, we need more magnesium. So often it's useful to supplement with magnesium. There's lots of different types of magnesium, but magnesium glycinate is very helpful for sleep. Magnesium is actually something you can put on your skin, so you can get a spray or a cream or butter, body butter. But actually, an Epsom salt bath, which has lots and lots of magnesium, can be really useful. Even if you just put your feet in it, it can be very helpful. And then we want to have the bedtime routine, as I talked about. But dimming the lights in the evenings is so really important. We don't want to be having too much light. We want to eat our last meal at least 3 hours before bedtime and kind of calm ourselves before we go to bed. So mental health and stress. We know how much mental health and stress can impact our bodies and make us feel not comfortable, that we can't cope with things, we don't feel resilient. But also it suppresses our immune system, increases our susceptibility to infection. So again, just like acute inflammation is very positive for the body, it helps our body to heal. Acute stress again enhances our immune system, helps you to work better. So if you are in kind of the days where you're being chased by tigers or woolly mammoths or whatever it might be, that acute stress would help you to run away from that animal and be safe. And that's when it becomes very, very important. So that's having stressed immune system just for minutes or hours at the most. However, most of us are experiencing chronic stress, which is for feeling stressed for several hours a day for weeks or months on end. And I know I've had stressful periods, at the end of last year, my cousin passed away suddenly, and that was quite stressful because there were so many things to manage. And I knew I was stressed, and I knew there was more inflammation in my body, and it suppressed our immune system. And I didn't feel as healthy, and I definitely was more prone to colds and flus. So this chronic stress, which doesn't switch off, can cause inflammation. So we really need to think about managing our mental health and stress management. So stress reduction is so important for so many different health conditions. We know it impacts both our physical and mental health, and there's lots of different things that can stress us. Now, there are lots of things that can actually help to reduce stress. We want to activate our parasympathetic nervous system. There's the sympathetic nervous system, which is our flight or fight, which obviously happens when the woolly mammoth or the tiger or whatever is chasing us. And then there's the parasympathetic nervous system, which we want to activate, and the vagus nerve. So we want to have good boundaries. We want to limit our commitments. So we're not saying yes to everything. Meditation, prayer, guided imagery, all of these things can help. Calming environments with music and light. I love to light a candle in the evening and have some relaxing music playing. Having stress-reducing botanicals and nutrients. I'm not going to go into that today, but there's lots of things that you can actually take as supplements. And then having a strong support network is so important, because when you feel like you've got support, your body feels under less stress, and connections are very important to our immune system. Which leads us on to social health. We're social animals. We're no different from, tigers or jaguars or gazelles or any of those other animals. We're social, and we live in society. And we know from Blue Zone research that if you have a strong network, you have actually got better immune health. We also know, particularly if you read Dr. Vivek Murthy's book, he used to be the ex-US Surgeon General, we know that loneliness is really linked with chronic stress. And actually, we're starting to understand so much about loneliness, particularly from, I think, data from the pandemic, and there is a loneliness pandemic going on right now, but the impact of loneliness on your body can be the same impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it's definitely something that we need to manage and understand, because it can really weaken our immune system. And we want to be able to manage, have connection, community, because that can support our immune system, but also means that we feel supported. So just shared a little bit about the blue zones, but in the blue zones, there are areas in the world where people are more likely to live over 100, more centenarians. So they have these 9 common attributes. They move naturally. They don't necessarily go to the gym, but they're walking up and down hills. They have a sense of purpose to life. They really think about stress relief and downshifting, so they're more likely to have naps and to rest and sit in community. They don't eat till they're full. They eat till they're kind of 80% full. They're often having very plant-rich diets. They do have wine. They're often very faith-based. For example, Loma Linda is a Seventh-day Adventist community, and they're very family-orientated and community-orientated. So these are areas, and we know that some of these things can support our immune system. So there's lots of information I've shared with you, and I really wanted to share that if you make some small steps, you can actually get some really big results. So you could change one meal, one walk, one better habit at a time. So I'm going to really help you to make those changes. Planning your meals and your routine in advance is really helpful. I know some of us get so busy that we just don't know, but having that time on maybe a Sunday evening or Sunday afternoon or whatever day it is, to just plan out what we're going to do, what we're going to eat, is going to make a huge difference. We want to focus on adding in those anti-inflammatory foods, because if we focus on adding things in, there's less space for the things which are not so good for us. And it's actually easier to add things in from a psychological perspective than it is to remove things. We want to track progress through how you feel. What's your energy like? What's your digestion like? What's your stress? And we want to try and be consistent. We don't think about just being perfect all the time. So I don't think, oh, I had that bag of crisps, I'm not going to do the rest of it. No, just continue. Just pick up where you left off. So I've actually created a 5-day anti-inflammatory reset, which will start on Sunday. So you're able to go in, And each day we'll talk to 5 of the main points that we have talked about in this talk and actually practice those. It comes with a shopping list, loads of recipes. So what I would suggest is if you go to this QR code, you'll be able to get to my website and you'll be able to get to that free reset on Sunday. It'll go live on Sunday. And now we are going to take some questions from you. I know there's going to be lots and lots of questions. So I'm going to share each question before I give you the answer. So I'm looking at the first question. How much bread is good or bad for you? I eat bread, but I'm not sure if I should be having as much as I do. So first of all, can be so many different types of food. It can go from the supermarket white slice to like a whole grain sourdough. So I think you want to be thinking about the quality. Sorry, the question's just bit. The quality of the bread, and thinking about, rather than having bread, can you replace that with other foods which are more diverse? So there's nothing wrong with bread. It's about having good quality. So a sourdough or a whole grain bread is going to have more fiber. It's going to have fewer inflammatory compounds. So you want to consider what type of bread you're having and then think about adding in other whole grains instead of bread. So let's say for breakfast, you're having 2 eggs and a piece of sourdough. Can you think about having 2 eggs and maybe some like homemade baked beans or some other sort of baked beans and maybe some vegetables instead? I hope that helps. Next one, it goes on. What do you think about eggs in your diet? Good or bad for information? Thanks. I think that eggs are actually really, really fantastic foods because they're rich in protein. They're also rich in something, the egg yolk itself is rich in something called choline, which is really important for our brain health. A lot of us don't have enough of it. So I think there's a lot of myths about eggs, and it all kind of goes back to the 80s in the UK, when we had salmon and all sorts of different things. But actually, eggs can be a really, really healthy food. They're very easy. They're easy to get hold of. They're cheap. They're convenient. You can cook eggs in so many different ways. So I personally include eggs in my diet because I'm an omnivore. And I do think having a couple of eggs a day is perfectly safe. They're obviously talked about cholesterol, but I think what we have to remember that people's cholesterol levels is more linked to their genetics and saturated fat intake than some of these other healthy foods. Next question. I hope that I answered that. In terms of a sedentary work life, how much movement during a working day can adequately or significantly reduce the risk of inflammation? This is a fantastic question. So what I would say is these days, we're all likely to be sedentary. We're sitting at a desk. But if you can set an alarm every hour to move for 5 minutes, that's going to impact your body. So let's say you work for 8 hours. So if you have 5 minutes every hour for 8 hours, that's going to be 40 minutes of movement. So what can you do? Things that you can do on the spot, like you can do squats. Squats are really powerful for reducing insulin resistance. You go for a quick walk. I love walking meetings where I'm basically taking a meeting with somebody either in real life on a walk or on a call, because that gets you moving. Just doing little press ups against the wall, just doing little movements like little high knee jumps, anything in that 5 minutes can really make a difference to reduce the risk of inflammation. So next question. It seems like there are now more businesses than ever selling supplements with various science-backed health benefits. Can you recommend a trusted source of information that can be used to check out the scientific accuracy of any claims? Oh, if only there were a resource that did that. Sadly, there isn't much of a resource. There are lots of businesses and they are selling supplements. And unfortunately, there's a lot of marketing and a lot of it's complete rubbish. However, there are lots of supplements which are science-backed, which have got a lot of information. So I think you need to go to each individual brand and each individual website to see what their science is. Are they reputable? Or have they had any clinical trials? Have they actually tested this in people? Have they shared the science behind this? Because all of this becomes really important. And then I think working with a nutritionist becomes really important to really understand what supplements you need for your body, because there's tons of supplements and a lot of them have got great science, but do you need them? We are all so individual. Our genetics are so different. Our lifestyles are so different. Our diets are so different due to culture and what we're used to eating. So as much as things may have scientific backing, they may not be the right thing for you. There's lots of things which I don't agree with, which you can spend a lot of money on, like multivitamins, greens powders. A lot of them don't have the sufficient amount of the ingredient, which is going to actually make a difference to your body. So I wouldn't spend any money on those sorts of things. I'd really sort of think about what you need. Omega-3s are very important. There are lots of reputable brands, and they'll share things about their sustainability and how they create them and the kind of cleanliness of the product. Vitamin D, again, vitamin D can be cheap and cheerful. You don't need anything kind of massively expensive. You can take sprays, you can take tablets, but those are the two that I do recommend for most people. What would I recommend for IBS? So IBS can have so many different causes, and each person's very individual. So I would really recommend that you work with a trusted and trained nutritionist, dietitian, GP, because there are lots of different things. You can do an anti-FODMAP diet. A FODMAP is basically these fermented oligosaccharides, which can be in things like onions and garlic and all sorts of very healthy foods. But for some people, they can provide a trigger. So we want to make sure we eliminate those from your diet and then slowly add them back in. But you do want to work with somebody who knows what they're talking about. There's no one size fits all for IBS. What are some physical symptoms of high levels of inflammation? How do we know if we have it? So things like having a puffy face, that can be an indication of inflammation. Obviously, if you measure your CRP levels, that can be a measure of inflammation. Unfortunately, there's not, those are the main things you want to be looking at. With inflammation, it's about thinking like, for example, are you starting to get pre-diabetes? Have you put on body fat? Are you having a high blood pressure? Are you having other cardiovascular issues? It's the symptoms that are really a sign of the inflammation. As I said at the very first slide, it's kind of invisible. So you do want to be kind of really measuring those things and looking at your health overall and looking at other measures. What are my thoughts on a carnivore diet? If you look at the data, a carnivore diet doesn't really have the nutrients you require for a healthy body. There's a lack of fiber because you're not eating any plants, and really we can only get fiber from plant-based foods. And that includes things like chocolate. By the way, chocolate is a great source of fiber. And so I don't recommend it. For some people, it's been really helpful to actually reduce inflammation because they're reacting to lots of different things. But I personally wouldn't recommend that carnivore diet to anyone. Diet Coke versus Coke. If you're going to have Coke, have a little bit of the full fat. The Diet Coke itself, remember, if it has sweeteners, it has aspartame, we know that's actually disrupting your gut microbiome. I would actually get rid of the Coke, full stop. It's one of the foods that we know that is creating not just inflammation, but obesity too, because it's so calorific. And in the diet one, the only difference is it hasn't got the sugar, so maybe not as calorific, but it's got aspartame, which actually impacts your gut microbiome, which can actually make you put on weight in the first place. Let's start replacing that. Start replacing with fizzy water with a bit of lemon, and then trying to reduce, because I know of cases of people who, even people like doctors having 10 cans of Coke of diet Coke and things like that. It's high in caffeine. It's really not good for you. So please don't. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I've heard that eating onions and tomatoes aren't good for the condition. Is this true? That's actually a really fantastic question. Rheumatoid arthritis is linked to inflammation. For some people, cutting out some foods which are triggering, like onions and tomatoes, can make a difference. Not for everybody. For other people, actually eating those foods which are rich in antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds can make the difference. There's something to do with the acidity and how it works in your body. But really, again, until you do an elimination diet, cut things out and add things back in, we don't know what it is. It may be that if we actually started doing an anti-inflammatory diet, adding lots of herbs and spices to food, eating anti-inflammatory foods like the salmon and the nuts and the seeds, all of those things, drinking, that can make a massive difference to your rheumatoid arthritis. And it's something I work on with lots of patients, and we've made a huge difference in a matter of weeks, changing these kind of inflammatory conditions. I had bowel cancer last year, and I asked what I can change in my diet to avoid inflammation disease. The doctor said not much, but when I looked into this, and I believe you're covering most of what I found. So sadly, I went to medical school, and I left medicine relatively early on to train in nutritional medicine and become a nutritional scientist. We don't learn very much about nutrition and lifestyle at medical school. And that was true 25 years ago, and it's the same now. There are amazing organizations that are trying to train doctors. There are lots of doctors who you've heard speak in this amazing conference that we're at who have trained themselves and gone through other kind of forms of training. But the problem is that generally in oncology, they're not giving that information, despite there being so much evidence. If you go to the World Cancer Research Fund website, there's lots and lots of data for both the public and for doctors to really understand the link between nutrition and lifestyle and cancer. Up to 40% of cancers can be potentially preventable by changing in diet and lifestyle. I'm not saying that yours was preventable. Absolutely not. What I'm trying to say is there's things we can do to reduce the risk of recurrence and reduce the risk full stop. I personally have had breast cancer 3 times. I'm very genetically prone to it. I'm inherited from both my parents. But I have had a cancer that's not spread. And I do think that kind of utilizing the science of what you can eat and what not to eat, but more importantly, kind of managing the stress, the sleep, the physical activity, that's really made that my cancer that I've had has never spread. So it's definitely something I'm very passionate about. And if you'd like to find out more, please contact me. I think we've got time for a couple more questions, haven't we? There's lots and lots of questions. Is it true that the body can't absorb collagen without additional supplements? No, I don't know who said that. So first of all, when you eat meat and eggs and fish, that is rich in protein and the amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein, and that includes making collagen is basically a smaller building block. And so if you're eating more meat and fish and eggs and protein-rich foods, you're going to be having more building blocks to make the collagen in your body. And this whole thing about additional supplements is such a marketing tool. I think there isn't even evidence to say that collagen's necessary can help with skin. I think by kind of having a diet that's anti-inflammatory and by having more protein in various ways, that can absolutely help because there's more building blocks for that collagen. But what we also know is that collagen supplements are actually more useful for anyone who's got joint issues and ligament issues. So yeah. Is the jury out on sweeteners such as stevia, please? So there's so many different sweeteners. Stevia is a more natural one made from plant. So far, we don't know as much, but what we can see from the data is that stevia doesn't impact that microbiome like some like these artificial sweeteners like aspartame. So yes, the jury is still out, as in we don't know more about it enough. But what we can see from initial data is that it's less damaging than having things like aspartame and artificial sweeteners. More questions. I was diagnosed with an inflammatory condition, adenomyosis, last year, and I have systemic inflammation in my body as a result, as well as histamine flare-ups. I found an antihistamine diet helps with the histamine flares, but there are a lot of anti-inflammatory foods I can't have because they're a trigger. E.g., fermented foods, beans, lentils, fish, some berries, and most nuts. Any advice on how to manage my inflammation? So firstly, I've got to say that I can't get personalized advice here because I don't have your full medical history and I don't know enough. But what I can do is give you some general advice. So everyone's very different. As I shared before, everyone's triggers are very personalized and very individual. And what we need to understand is what those triggers are. For some of those anti-inflammatory foods that may not work for you, but sometimes when we can heal your gut, when we can heal some inflammation, you can actually successfully add some of those foods back into your diet. Now, I don't know what age you are. I don't know if you're male or female. Women are more likely to have autoimmune conditions, whatever their autoimmune condition might be, adenomyosis being one of those. And sometimes managing our hormones can also help with that. We know that managing our gut, also stress management, all of those different things can help to manage inflammation in our body. So with that, it's not just about the diet. You may want to look at your sleep. You may want to be looking at your stress. You maybe be looking at your gut health. You maybe want to be looking at your social connection, because all of those things are also going to make a difference. So I hope that's helpful. How can I approach my GP to get a CRP checked? Well, if you're having any standard blood test, that is one of the key things that it will check. So if you've got any symptoms for any kind of disease or anything you're worried about, go to your GP. Obviously, they're very busy right now, so please understand that. But try and understand what health issues and try and keep a diary of any issues that you've been having, and then go to your doctor and ask them to test it. On the other end of the spectrum, can high levels of CRP cause tiredness and sleeping too much? That's going to be very individual. So high levels of CRP, it's not the other end of the spectrum. High levels of CRP show a higher level of inflammation. And we need to understand what's causing that tiredness and sleeping too much. It could just be they're both things are happening at the same time. You may have some sort of viral infection. We don't know. So it's not a question I can answer at this point, but it's definitely worth investigating. And I think that if you work with somebody who looks at nutrition and lifestyle, and your GP looks at your blood tests, you can actually start to investigate what is causing that tiredness. And let's see, is it, I mean, I don't know if you're male or female, if you're going through things like menopause, which you may have heard about Dr. Nigat talk about in an earlier talk today, that can also impact your fatigue, brain fog, all things like that. My husband has ulcerative colitis kept under control fairly well by medication and has now been told his diverticulitis too. Any suggestions, as too much fiber can really irritate his condition? So it's really interesting that it's been controlled by medication. Has he been looking at a diet as well? Because I think that would be interesting to know. Diverticulitis is very common, particularly in people over 40. So, and there are lots of different causes for that. So you may, again, it's not a question, it's very personalized, so I can't answer without looking at history. But again, kind of going back to those, fiber, you might want to not focus on those fiber foods, but you might want to look at like the herbs and spices because they're anti-inflammatory. Looking at having more of those healthy fats, things like more protein, wild salmon, nuts and seeds, olive oils, avocados, because all of those things are also equally anti-inflammatory too. And they've got some beautiful colors in there too. So that's worth trying. Again, I can't give personalized advice, but hopefully that's been helpful. What we're going to go to next. So bulgur wheat. Let me talk about bulgur wheat, and then I'll go back to the. So bulgur wheat, yeah, it can be really healthy if you look for a whole grain version. It's great in salads. Things like tabbouleh, which is a Middle Eastern salad. It's got bulgur wheat and lots of herbs and spices. I think it's quite good. Do you want to go back to that previous one, Steph, and then we can? Is durum whole wheat okay? Yes. I mean, again, like everyone's different. Some people do not deal well with gluten. So we need to investigate if you're gluten sensitive, or if you're celiac, then you cannot, basically you're almost allergic to gluten. So you need to think about that. So we need to look at, but generally, again, as part of a diet, durum wheat, which is in pasta, but make it sure that you don't overcook the pasta. Keep it al dente. And in an ideal world, what you want to do is make the pasta the day before, put it in the fridge. This increases the resistant starch and the fiber, and then warm it up the next day. How would you know if you don't convert plant-based more effectively? You won't know. There's no test you can do for this, but this is just that this is how much we convert. I guess one way of knowing is whether you've got increased inflammation in your body, but adding in an omega-3 supplement, even if it's plant-based from algae or fish marine-based, and seeing if things change in your health and well-being, whether you feel different. And like when I talked about the 5-day inflammatory reset, we looking at your kind of energy levels, like your stress levels, your digestion, all of those things become really, really important. Are there any foods that can help keep diverticular disease under control? Again, I can't answer this because it's going to be very personal to you. We're all so different, and it depends on what triggers your body has. We want to look at not just food and nutrition, we want to look at also lifestyle too, sleep, our immune system, managing stress. So all of those things. There are so many fantastic questions, and I'm really sorry that I couldn't answer them all. Please follow me on Instagram, Toral Shah Integrative Health, or go to my website, and I'll be able to give you some more answers. If you send me questions in, I can try and make some videos about it too. But it's been such a pleasure to be here, and I hope it's been all useful information for you. And I look forward to seeing if any of you join the 5-day anti-inflammatory reset. Thank you so much to the producers of Wellbeing Live. It's been such a fantastic event to be involved with. And please go back and listen to all the amazing talks. I've got great friends talking, Dr. Faye Begati, Dr. Ayam Panja, Nigar Arif, and so many other people.